Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is now in its 10th week, and overnight, Russian missiles hit the capital of Kyiv as the UN Secretary General was visiting. Russia claims it destroyed an arms factory, but Ukrainian officials say a residential building was hit. That comes as growing fears are really expanding because the war could expand beyond Ukraine's borders. On Wednesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin warned the West that any outside interference in the conflict could be met with a lightning-fast response.
If someone intervenes in events, they should know that our response to counterstrikes will be immediate, quick. We have all the instruments that no one could brag about.
And on Thursday, President Biden requested an additional $33 billion from Congress to help Ukraine.
The cost of this fight is not cheap, but caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen. And as long as the assaults and atrocities continue, we're going to continue to supply military assistance.
Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Michael Shear, White House correspondent for The New York Times. And here with me in studio, Nicole Killian, a congressional correspondent for CBS News, and Hans Nichols, political reporter for Axios. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here on what is a busy night in Washington. Y'all are partying with us at this table. Michael, I want to start with you. Overnight, there was news that broke that Russia had sent a missile, hit a missile to Kyiv, of course, the capital city of Ukraine. That came as the UN Secretary General was visiting, as we noted. That also came after the UN Secretary General was meeting face-to-face with Putin just a couple days before. I wonder what you make of the significance of this attack happening and the timing of it.
Well, look, I think it underscores what has been pretty true for the last several weeks, at least in the United States and Washington, but in capitals across Europe and elsewhere, which is that this war is not ending anytime soon. To the extent that Vladimir Putin pulled out of the areas around Kyiv and is focusing his attention on the south and east of the country of Ukraine, that was really a reflection of how poorly his forces had done in its attempt to capture the entire country. But it by no means, I think, signifies that this is about to end. And, I think, one of the things that Putin is particularly good at is sending reminders that this is not over, that he's not done, that he, for all of the poor performance of his military, that they still have lots of capabilities to inflict pain. Perhaps they will be able to seize a good chunk of Ukraine on the east. But even if they're not able to do that, their weaponry allows them to inflict damage as far as they want across the country, whether it's in the north, in Kyiv, in the west, or in the east. And so, I just think it underscores that reality and helps to explain why the allies, the United States and others, are bracing and requesting and finding more and more resources to supply to Kyiv and to Ukraine, because they know it's not about to end soon.
Certainly. And when you think about it, you were talking about this idea that the war is certainly not going to be over anytime soon. And in some ways, Hans, I want to come to you because the defense secretary raised some eyebrows, or at least raised my eyebrows, when he said that the U.S.'s goal here, what it wants to see is Russia's military capabilities weakened. I wonder what your reporting reveals about sort of the proxy war that's going on right now.
Well, it's very clear that the administration is being deliberative about talking about Russia's battlefield losses and what is actually happening on the ground. There's almost a cadence to what's happening, where we have the nightly briefing from Zelensky in Ukraine, and every other day you get a deep Pentagon debrief on just narrating what's happening in the war, and narrating it in a way that doesn't cast Russia in a great light. And it seems as though this is sort of the 1-2 punch in terms of internal bolstering the people from Zelensky, and externally what you're getting from the U.S., the warnings to Putin, the messaging to Putin. But it does seem strong and it does seem unique. And as Michael's noting, the Russians still have some cards to play. They have a lot of capabilities. And as we all know, there's some scary capabilities out there.
And there are some who are wondering whether or not this all that's happening that the administration might be moving closer to direct conflict with Russia. What's your reporting reveal about that?
There's still a bright line there of actual direct conflict, but let's just look at where it shifted, right? I mean, remember the debate in the Obama administration, no lethal weapons. Well, that seems like it was decades ago, right? 5, 6 years ago, now we're all on board with actual lethal weapons. President of the United States, the Democratic president, is going to a defense contractor, Lockheed Martin, to watch javelins coming off the assembly line or where they build javelins, right? That is going to have some strong images. That's a little bit stronger than just plain rhetoric. Think of the images and sort of the backdrop to that. And this is a White House that wants to, as you just heard the president talk about, they want to spend money, they're prepared to spend whatever it takes. And just context, guys, $33 billion is a lot of money. That, I mean, you look at foreign military sales to Israel, I think it's the highest out there. It's about $3 billion a year. This is 10 times that, and maybe even a more compressed time frame. So a lot of money and a clear signal of intent. They want to be in this for the long haul.
Yeah. And Nicole, Hans described $33 billion as a lot of money. It is, of course, a lot of money. What's Congress and lawmakers there? How do they see this request from the White House? Is there support there?
Well, at this point, it seems that there will be bipartisan support for this package from both Democrats and Republicans. You know, I did have a chance to talk to Congressman Michael McCall, who sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, a ranking member, and asked him, is this figure eye-popping to you? Because that's what some Senate Republicans had said. And he said, look, you know, we've got to go through this package, but, you know, he feels strongly that Ukraine needs all the military might that it can get. And of course, Democrats, too, want to move forward with this package as soon as possible. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has said he intends to make it a priority.
And there's also some economic assistance in there as well, right? I think the number for just direct military assistance in the 20 billion range. There's some economic assistance. There's some food security. So it's not all military, but again, it's the broader point, and that is that they want to bolster the government there. And they want to make sure the Ukrainian people have what they need to survive, endure, and hopefully succeed.
And Nicole, you talked about Schumer, Senator Schumer, of course. There's some talk that Democrats want to tie this to COVID. We're going to get to a whole block on COVID, but just talk a little bit about what the challenges could be there and how much of a gamble it might be for Democrats.
Well, I was going to say the devil is in the details, not so much of this package, but really how they get it done. And we have seen, especially when Democrats try to link packages in the past, it hasn't been so successful. And
that's putting it lightly, yes.
Mildly, right? But you know, this time potentially could be no different. I mean, Republicans are certainly balking at this idea of tying the Ukraine funding to the COVID funding, and really the premise behind this for Democrats is the administration has made clear they also want this COVID relief funding passed, that this will help for future pandemics. It didn't succeed before the recess, so they want to try to bring it up again. And just today, Speaker Pelosi said she does believe that this should be tied together. So this is something that could potentially bog both aid packages down. And
Michael, the White House is indicating that this money, this $33 billion would last 5 months. I think, you know, that's obviously at the end of the fiscal year, but that's also a lot of money. What's your sense inside the White House of what's motivating officials to make this big ask to Congress?
Well, I think it's two different things, right? I mean, on the substantive side, I think they recognize, as we've all been talking about, that the war isn't going to be over soon, and so you don't want to be in a position of having to go back to the Congress over and over and over again with a bunch of small asks if you know or you think that that it's going to be a costly endeavor that's going to last a long time. I also think there's, you know, look, this is all playing out in a political context. It's an election year. You know, I think President Biden wants to be seen as solid and determined on an issue that does have bipartisan support. There is a lot of support across the aisle for Ukraine and for not letting them falter in the face of the Russian invasion. And I sort of second Hans's mentioning of the trip next week to the plant where they make these Javelin missiles. I mean, it is remarkable that that is a trip that this president is going to take. He never wanted to make a trip like that. This was a president that wanted to spend the next several months before the election focused on the economy, focused on job creation, focused on the so-called bread and butter issues that American people care about. The fact that he's going and doing this photo op just tells you all you need to know about where he thinks he needs to position himself, kind of politically at this moment.
It's certainly going to be striking when we see President Biden next week in Alabama. I do want to talk to you, Hans, because even as the American people, of course, are saying they want to talk about bread and butter issues, there is the Russian foreign minister who is saying specifically that the more that the West, they say, meddles, of course, the West would say helps Ukraine, the more that there's a risk for a nuclear war. When you talk to your sources, especially national security officials, how concerned are they about this?
It's troubling, and I wish I had a better barometer for talking to national security officials on just how concerned they are, because they toss around phrases that, and current informers that trouble me, if I'm just honest about it, right? And you talk about the potential for chems, for nukes, for tacticals, and just the ease with which officials are, and especially on the former side, they're tossing these terms around, makes you think that this is quite serious, right? And none of us know how many more moves Putin's going to make. We're in a very difficult position here. And, it's troubling when anyone threatens, and let's be very clear what's happening. They're threatening to use weapons of mass destruction. And it's, they can hide behind with caveats and whatnot, but they know exactly what their intent is. And that to me seems significant.
That is absolutely significant.
Well, I was going to say, even Senator Lindsey Graham, who's always very hawkish, said in an interview earlier this week that he thinks that a nuclear strike of some sort could be a possibility, or that the Russians may be contemplating that. Now, we don't know, again, if there's further intelligence necessarily to back that up, but it certainly remains a concern among members of Congress as well, and the implications.
And to think about all of these concerns, not only are now, as I listen to Hans sort of scare me about nuclear weapons and what could happen there.
Yeah, look, I obviously don't have a roadmap into Putin's mind. I don't know what their intent. There could be some strategic bluffing taking place. There can be a whole host of things. There's people much smarter than I am at the Pentagon who have Putin's psychological profile. They have excellent intelligence. I think one thing that we've sort of learned throughout this entire process is that most of the intelligence, at least the predictive on what Putin was going to do, has been accurate. So there should be a fair, some acknowledgement of that. But look, when you had a conversation with Lindsey Graham, people are just sort of talking about it as though this is a real possibility. And I don't know how quickly Lindsey Graham then pivoted to other issues, but it seems like a moment when you have Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, even entertaining this. And I think it just tells us where we are. I don't know what they're saying in the hallways. You spend all your time down there. What you're picking up in just kind of sidebar conversations.
Well, I think it remains a real concern. And, for all the reasons that you explained with respect to the Pentagon, you always have to be prepared for that worst case scenario. And I think whether it's the Pentagon, whether it's the Hill, whether it's the administration, you have to be prepared for the worst. Hopefully it does not get to that point. But certainly it's clear that Russia is not done, that they could escalate things, especially with this symbolic victory day coming up in just another week or two.
Yeah. And of course now... go ahead, Michael.
Just really quickly, the one thing that I think would caution so that our readers or our listeners don't get totally panicked is that the U.S. military, the allies, they haven't changed their own nuclear posture, right? Which would be, you don't have the sense that that any on this side have actually taken fundamental steps to change the military readiness vis-a-vis nuclear weapons, which gives you some indication that it's not as imminent as people might think.
Certainly.